Have you ever wondered why after exercise you may feel more fatigued or like you're on the cusp of getting sick? In today's video, I'm going to walk you through how to exercise when you're in a Hashimoto's flare, what to know, what symptoms to watch for, and how to get back to your normal activity routine without feeling worse afterwards. And I work with a lot of exercisers and former athletes who love to work out hard and want to incorporate exercise into their normal weekly regimen. But when they're in a flare, are experiencing a lot of fatigue and inflammation and negative side effects that make it really difficult to exercise consistently. We're going to talk about exactly how to navigate this problem in today's video. So, first and foremost, it's important to understand that exercise is a hormetic stressor. What that means is that it is a good stressor on the system. It creates a stress hormone response, but this stress hormone response is actually essential to the adaptations of exercise eliciting an adaptation. What that means is essentially getting stronger, getting fitter, growing a muscle, or being able to run faster. Through that stressor that we accomplish all of these things. And really, we see that stress response happen mainly in situations that are paired with inadequate nutrition. So, for example, if you enter a workout and maybe you haven't fueled properly beforehand, that's going to increase your risk of the exercise becoming a negative stressor on the body. An additional source of this could be if you're doing higher intensity type exercise, this can also lead to more of a stressor. So this stressor is good because we need that in order to recover and become stronger and fitter from it. However, if we don't have the resources to be able to put towards exercise, this is when you can notice more of a flare, a fatigue, joint pain, inflammation, maybe water retention, or even feeling like you're on the cusp of getting sick, or maybe you do get full-blown sick the next day after you get done with a type of workout. Generally, this is because there isn't enough ATP or energy to be able to fuel the demands of exercise. We need adequate ATP for essentially every cellular function in the body. We need enough ATP to detoxify. Our immune system needs enough ATP, and our muscle cells need enough ATP. So if there is a chronic infection, if the immune system is in overdrive because of the autoimmune processes, like what happens in a Hashimoto's flare, all of that ATP, those resources, are being diverted over towards the immune system. We don't have enough ATP left over to fund the demands of exercise, and this is where you're going to experience worsening of fatigue or worsening of immune system symptoms after you've finished a workout. Generally speaking, exercise should be a positive situation for mitochondrial function. It should actually increase a process called mitochondrial biogenesis, which essentially is the death of old damaged cells and the growth and adaptation of new mitochondria. However, when our body's in this situation of immune exhaustion or immune overdrive, that's when we can see that we're not actually able to get those mitochondrial improvements, and instead, exercise can actually be more depleting and actually cause more negative ramifications to mitochondrial function. So, what's the solution for getting back to the things that you love doing and getting active again? We want to first start off by supporting the mitochondria. We need to look at ways that we can enhance mitochondrial function through addressing, do we have enough nutrients to boost mitochondrial function? I have another YouTube video on my channel where I talk about the role of mitochondrial function in fertility. And while we're talking about the subject of fertility more specifically in this video, it is a great video to watch as it relates to mitochondrial function in general, because I mentioned in there the types of food sources to incorporate and the types to limit because of how they impact mitochondrial function. You could also look at utilizing supplementation to help get there faster and utilizing some of these mitochondrial support nutrients. Our mitochondria need lots of good oil and gas. And what that means is we need adequate carnitine as well as CoQ10 and B vitamins and even things like magnesium too to be able to fund mitochondrial function. So ensuring that we have adequate amounts of these through dietary sources as well as potentially supplementation can be really beneficial. And sometimes it can be helpful to also test mitochondrial function. And that's where we might do a functional test such as an organic acids panel so that we can understand where in the whole energy cycle process are there bottlenecks, or where maybe are there not enough cofactors to be able to help support the full cycle of mitochondrial function. Next, we want to look at starting to slowly and gradually ramp up exercise without overstressing mitochondrial function. So we want to start with things that are more gentle, restorative, and that don't create too much of an ATP demand. So think of things that are in zone 1 or zone 2 heart rate, such as walking. Maybe it's starting with flat walking, which would be more of zone 1 heart rate, then progressing to something like incline walking that would be more with zone 2. You could also looking at doing some steady state cycling, or we could look at yoga, Pilates that's not extremely strenuous, where there's not a lot of muscle breakdown or muscle tearing and soreness happening, and there's not a lot of oxidative stress demand like you would get if you were running or doing something that's higher intensity. So start with those lower impact movements after you've done some mitochondrial support, and also look at adding in some things to be able to help support your lymphatic system. You could look at maybe getting a professional lymphatic drainage massage. You could also do some rebounding, some jump rope, very light, of course, as well as maybe utilizing a vibration plate to be able to help stimulate lymphatic movement, or even doing some cleaver's tea infusions, which are a great way to get in a food source, or technically an herbal source of an herb, to be able to boost mitochondrial or to boost the lymphatic system. So those are some things we can do alongside of the walking as we slowly start to grade into things. I generally recommend no more than a 10% increase each week. Start very slow, start with 5 or 10 minutes for your walk. Then the next week, if that felt good and you didn't get any fatigue or worsening of symptoms afterwards, then increase that by another couple of minutes. So we're making very gradual increases on a weekly basis to make sure that we're matching the demands, or maybe even coming under what the demands are of the body, so that we don't cause more mitochondrial depletion. Then you can look at starting to integrate some slow resistance training that's going to provide adequate recovery periods in between your exercises, and that isn't going to create too much muscle damage. So I usually recommend staying somewhere in the 60 to 70% of your 1 rep maximum range, where it's not going to be extremely heavy and there's going to be a very moderate level of volume. So by that, it's always best to try to consolidate stressors and try to do all of your upper body and lower body movements on one given day. With that, you're looking at utilizing a push, a press, a hinge, and a squat movement, and making sure that we're keeping volume really low. So by that, usually staying under about 30 total reps within that given exercise. So if you're doing pull-ups, maybe that looks like 4 sets of 6, that would be 24 total reps, and making sure that whatever weight that you're using for those, or whatever resistance you're using, is no greater than 70% of the last rep that you can do. So if you could do 5 pull-ups, then 70% of that might be doing 3 pull-ups for each set. So that's a great way to be able to periodize your way back into things. And then again, kind of following this weekly progression of increasing the volume and intensity by about 10% each week, and making sure that we're not getting any setbacks in that process. Then finally, once we've really restored mitochondrial function and we're feeling much better, that's where we can look at adding in some short anaerobic type exercise, adding in maybe think intervals, whether that's running or biking intervals, maybe also looking at doing some higher intensity type sprinting. These can be great ways to be able to boost mitochondrial function, but we want to make sure that we have that ATP there before we try to do things like this. It's always a good idea to start low and go slow, and that's where we have something like our Strength and Hormones workout program, where we actually can help you be able to utilize a model called progressive overload, where we're slowly increasing volume and intensity, and we're doing it in a way that's very methodical to make sure that it's not overstraining that ATP, and also getting the benefits of improved mitochondrial function at the same time. Now, if any of those types of workouts that you're doing, it's really important that you're focusing on your breath. If we are breathing solely through our mouth, that can actually negatively impact our mitochondrial function. So we want to really make sure that we're trying to exclusively nasal breathe as much as we can. This is, of course, going to become impossible as you get into some of these higher intensity intervals where it does require oxygen consumption. But when we're first starting out with things with zone 1 and zone 2, you should be able to keep your lips pierced and breathe solely through your nose. And this can be a great way to actually help boost mitochondrial function, and can even be something that you work on outside of those workouts, maybe through doing some breath work that's utilizing some big diaphragmatic breaths, where we're getting a big belly expansion followed by a slow mouth exhale, or even utilizing something like mouth tape while you're sleeping to be able to try to help improve that nasal breathing. So I know that's a lot of different strategies to think about, but the most important thing is to make sure we've done the mitochondrial support first. We're waiting until the body is ready. And then once it's ready, we're very slowly titrating things up and listening to the body after each workout session and not overdoing it. If you like to do any other things outside of exercise that require a lot of ATP, like sauna or hot baths, really anything where there's really hot temperatures, I'd be very cautious with adding that in during this time period, especially if your priority is to get back into exercise, because those types of activities are further going to require more ATP, and the cumulative increase of the exercise plus the heat exposure could be too much for where your mitochondrial function might be at that given point. So those could also be something that you blend grading back in once you feel like your mitochondrial hormone is fully ready. If this video was helpful, hit subscribe to my channel so you'll be the first to know when I release a new video. And if you want to head over to learn more about those foods to include and avoid for mitochondrial function, check out my video on how mitochondrial function impacts fertility.